The power grid collapses at 2:47 in the morning. You reach for your emergency radio. You turn the crank. The dynamo spins. The battery indicator glows green. You tune to the emergency broadcast frequency. Static fills your ears. You scan through every channel. Nothing but silence and interference. Your expensive survival radio has become a useless piece of plastic and circuitry. This is not a theoretical failure. This is the documented reality faced by thousands during Hurricane Katrina, the Northeast blackout of 2003, and the Texas freeze of 2021. The emergency radio you trusted has betrayed you at the exact moment you needed it most. Most people believe emergency radios fail because of dead batteries or poor reception. This is a dangerous oversimplification. The actual failure mechanisms are far more complex and far more predictable. Emergency radios fail because the entire emergency broadcast infrastructure they depend on has catastrophic vulnerabilities that manufacturers never mention and survival instructors rarely understand. Your radio works perfectly in your living room because the transmission towers have power. Your radio becomes worthless during a real disaster because those same towers go dark within hours of grid failure. The Federal Communications Commission requires backup power for broadcast stations, but those requirements specify only 2 hours of battery reserve for most stations. Some stations have generators, but generators require fuel. Fuel requires supply chains. Supply chains collapse during major disasters. The mathematics of radio transmission power tells the hidden story. A typical FM radio station transmits at 50,000 watts. This power level creates a signal strong enough to penetrate buildings and reach receivers 50 miles away. When that station switches to backup battery power, transmission power drops to 500 watts or less. The signal range collapses to less than 5 miles. Your emergency radio now needs line of sight to a tower that might be 10 or 20 miles away. The physics of radio propagation means that signal is gone. Emergency managers know this, radio engineers know this, but the survival industry keeps selling you radios without explaining that the towers themselves are the single point of failure. There is a deeper layer to this failure. The National Weather Service operates the NOAA weather radio system on 7 frequencies between 162.4 and 162.55 MHz. These frequencies use VHF transmission. VHF signals travel in straight lines. They cannot bend over the horizon. They cannot penetrate deep into valleys or dense urban cores. The transmitter network assumes normal conditions with powered repeater stations every 40 miles. When those repeaters fail, coverage gaps appear instantly. A mountain range between you and the nearest tower makes your weather radio completely useless. The engineers who designed this system knew about these limitations, but the system was built assuming temporary local emergencies, not cascading infrastructure collapse. Hurricane Katrina exposed every single one of these vulnerabilities simultaneously. The storm surge destroyed transmission towers along the coast. Flooding knocked out backup generators in low-lying areas. The few stations that remained operational ran on battery power that lasted less than 6 hours. Within 12 hours of landfall, 87% of radio stations in the affected region were off the air. Emergency managers in Louisiana later testified that the loss of broadcast infrastructure was one of the primary reasons rescue coordination failed so catastrophically. People with working emergency radios heard nothing but static because there was nothing to hear. The transmitters were dead. The crank-powered dynamo radio creates a false sense of security that is particularly dangerous. You turn the crank for 60 seconds. The manufacturer claims this provides 30 minutes of listening time. This claim is technically accurate under laboratory conditions, with a strong signal and minimal interference. In real disaster conditions, your radio must work much harder to extract a weak signal from background noise. The internal amplifier draws more current, the speaker draws more current, the digital tuner draws more current. Your 60 seconds of cranking now provides maybe 10 minutes of useful operation. You must crank continuously to maintain contact with emergency broadcasts. This is exhausting. This is impractical. This is a design failure disguised as a feature. The solar panel on top of your emergency radio suffers from even more practical limitations. Most emergency radios include a small solar cell rated at 100 milliwatts in direct sunlight. The internal battery holds 2,000 milliamp hours at 3.7 volts. Basic electrical mathematics shows that fully charging this battery requires approximately 74 hours of perfect direct sunlight. Disaster conditions usually include heavy cloud cover, smoke from fires, ash from volcanic eruptions, dust storms. Your solar panel now produces maybe 20 milliwatts. Charging time extends to 370 hours. That is more than 15 days of continuous exposure. Meanwhile, your radio dies after a few hours of intermittent use. The frequency coverage of most emergency radios reveals another critical deception. Your radio proudly advertises AM, FM, shortwave, and weatherband coverage. This seems comprehensive, but the useful range of each band depends entirely on propagation conditions you cannot control. AM radio uses ground wave propagation during the day and sky wave propagation at night. Ground waves travel maybe 100 miles under good conditions. Sky waves can travel thousands of miles by bouncing off the ionosphere. But sky wave propagation is unpredictable and subject to interference from solar activity, atmospheric conditions, and the 11-year solar cycle. The emergency broadcast you desperately need might be transmitting from 50 miles away, but completely unreachable because of ionospheric absorption. Shortwave radio introduces even more variables. Shortwave signals propagate by bouncing between the ionosphere and the ground. The ionosphere is not a solid surface. It is a region of ionized particles that changes density based on solar radiation, time of day, season, and random space weather events. A shortwave frequency that works perfectly at 3 in the afternoon might be completely dead at midnight. The reverse is also true. Professional radio operators spend years learning to predict propagation conditions. Your emergency radio has no such intelligence. You must manually scan through dozens of frequencies, hoping to find something. This process drains your battery while providing no guarantee of success. The receiver sensitivity specification on your radio's packaging is nearly meaningless for disaster scenarios. A typical emergency radio claims sensitivity of -100 decibels per milliwatt. This number measures the weakest signal the radio can theoretically detect in a laboratory with no interference. Real disaster environments have massive interference, power lines arcing from damage, electric motors and generators in vehicles, lightning from storms, solar panel inverters, LED lights. Every single one of these sources generates radio frequency noise. Your radio's real-world sensitivity is now -80 decibels or worse. Signals that should be perfectly clear become buried in noise. The squelch circuit in your radio creates another invisible failure point. Squelch is designed to mute the speaker when no signal is present, so you do not hear constant static. The squelch threshold is preset at the factory. If the incoming signal is weaker than the squelch threshold, your radio remains silent, even though a broadcast is present. You assume no one is transmitting. In reality, a weak emergency broadcast is being automatically filtered out by your own radio. Adjusting squelch requires menu navigation or hidden button combinations that vary by manufacturer. Most users never learn this. They assume their radio is working correctly when it is actually censoring weak but vital signals. The antenna system on a portable emergency radio represents a massive engineering compromise. A proper VHF antenna for NOAA weather radio frequencies should be approximately 39 inches long. This is the quarter wavelength for 162 MHz. Your emergency radio has a telescoping antenna that extends to maybe 12 inches. This is 70% shorter than optimal. The laws of physics dictate that a short antenna is dramatically less efficient than a proper length antenna. Your radio compensates with additional amplification in the receiver circuit. This amplification also amplifies noise. The signal-to-noise ratio gets worse. Reception degrades. The compact, convenient design you purchased is fundamentally incapable of optimal performance. The ferrite bar antenna used for AM reception inside your radio has similar compromises. AM broadcast frequencies range from 530 to 1710 kHz. A proper antenna for this band should be hundreds of feet long. Your radio uses a ferrite rod approximately 4 inches long, wrapped with copper wire. This works adequately when you are close to a powerful transmitter. During a disaster, AM stations reduce power or go off the air entirely. Your tiny ferrite antenna cannot pull weak signals from the noise. You point the radio in different directions, hoping for improvement. Sometimes this helps slightly because the ferrite bar is directional. But the fundamental problem remains. Your antenna is too small to be effective under difficult conditions. The emergency alert system that your radio is supposed to receive operates on a completely different technical foundation than most users understand. The system broadcasts a digital burst of information containing alert codes, location data, and message content. This burst lasts only a few seconds. Your radio must detect this burst, decode it, and determine if the alert applies to your location. This requires sophisticated digital signal processing. Cheap emergency radios use minimal processing power to save battery. The decoder circuit sometimes misses alerts entirely. You hear no alarm, no warning. The system transmitted the alert. Your radio was listening, but the decoder failed to recognize the signal pattern. This is not a hypothetical failure mode. Consumer Reports testing has documented alert detection rates as low as 60% for budget emergency radios. The battery chemistry inside your emergency radio determines its shelf life and disaster readiness in ways manufacturers deliberately obscure. Most emergency radios use lithium-ion batteries because they offer good energy density and relatively low self-discharge. But lithium-ion batteries have a finite calendar life regardless of use. A lithium-ion battery begins degrading the day it is manufactured. After 5 years, capacity drops to 70 or 80% of original spec. After 10 years, the battery may hold only 50% of rated capacity. Your emergency radio has been sitting in your closet for 7 years. You test it once a year and it works fine. But the battery has been slowly dying. When disaster strikes, your 30-minute reserve is now 15 minutes. The radio dies just as critical information is being broadcast. Temperature extremes accelerate battery degradation in predictable ways. Lithium-ion batteries lose significant capacity below freezing. At 0 degrees Fahrenheit, available capacity can drop to 50% or less. Your radio worked perfectly in your heated home, but now you are evacuating in winter conditions. Your battery-powered radio is nearly useless. Heat causes even faster degradation. At 110 degrees Fahrenheit, a lithium-ion battery ages approximately 4 times faster than at room temperature. Your emergency radio stored in your car during summer heat has cooked its battery into premature failure. The radio powers on, it seems fine, but under load, it dies within minutes. The false assumption that emergency broadcasts will always be available represents the most dangerous cognitive error. The emergency alert system is a cooperative network of broadcast stations, cable systems, satellite providers, and government agencies. This network assumes that most infrastructure remains functional. When infrastructure collapses beyond a certain threshold, the system fragments. Local stations go off the air, network connections fail, backup systems exhaust their fuel. The authorities who would normally broadcast emergency information are overwhelmed with immediate life safety operations. They have no power to transmit even if they wanted to. The emergency alert you are waiting for will never come because there is no longer any functioning system to deliver it. The broadcast industry has known about these systemic vulnerabilities for decades. After the Northeast blackout of 2003, the Federal Communications Commission commissioned multiple studies on broadcast infrastructure resilience. These studies found that most radio stations would fail within 4 hours of grid loss. The Commission issued recommendations for improved backup power, fuel reserves, and coordination with emergency management. Very few stations implemented these recommendations because they are expensive and provide no revenue benefit. The regulatory requirements remained minimal. The vulnerabilities remained unaddressed. The survival industry continued selling radios dependent on infrastructure everyone knew would fail. There is an alternative radio technology that survives infrastructure collapse, but almost no one owns the necessary equipment. High-frequency amateur radio operators communicate directly with each other over distances of thousands of miles without any infrastructure whatsoever. The ionosphere provides natural signal propagation for frequencies between 3 and 30 megahertz. An amateur radio operator with 100 watts of power and a proper antenna can establish reliable communications across continents. This capability persists regardless of grid status or tower failures. But operating amateur radio requires a license, technical knowledge, and equipment that costs hundreds or thousands of dollars. The emergency radio in your disaster kit cannot access these frequencies and cannot transmit even if it could. The tactical communication systems used by military and emergency services offer another model of infrastructure-independent operation. These systems use VHF and UHF frequencies in the 30 to 500 MHz range with point-to-point in mesh networking capability. Portable repeaters can be deployed rapidly to extend range. Handheld units can communicate directly without any fixed infrastructure. Battery life is measured in days, not hours. But these professional systems cost thousands of dollars per radio. They require training and licensing. They operate on frequencies your consumer emergency radio cannot receive. The technological capability exists to communicate reliably during disasters. You simply do not have access to it. The hard truth is that emergency radios are designed to make consumers feel prepared without actually providing meaningful disaster resilience. The manufacturers know the limitations. The retailers know the limitations. But telling customers that their $70 radio is nearly worthless during a real catastrophe would destroy the market. So, the packaging shows dramatic disaster imagery. The features list emphasizes multiple power sources and comprehensive frequency coverage. The fine print never mentions that the entire system depends on towers that will fail and batteries that cannot sustain meaningful operation. You are sold a psychological comfort item disguised as a survival tool. The alternative to broadcast reception is broadcast transmission, but almost no civilian emergency radios can transmit. Citizens Band Radio, operating on frequencies near 27 MHz, allows unlicensed transmission with a range of a few miles under normal conditions. During optimal atmospheric conditions, CB signals can propagate hundreds or thousands of miles. But CB radios require external power or large battery packs. They need proper antennas mounted on vehicles or elevated structures. Most importantly, CB communication requires other people listening on the same frequency at the same time. Your distress call reaches no one if no one is listening. This coordination problem makes CB radio marginally useful for convoy communication, but unreliable for emergency contact. The Family Radio Service and General Mobile Radio Service frequencies provide short-range communication without licenses. These radios operate with very low power on UHF frequencies around 462 MHz. Typical range is less than 2 miles in real-world conditions, despite manufacturer claims of 36 miles. The 36-mile claim assumes line-of-sight communication from mountaintop to mountaintop with no obstacles. In urban or forested terrain, range collapses to a few thousand feet. These radios work well for family coordination during evacuations. They work poorly for obtaining emergency information, because you can only receive what other people nearby are transmitting. If everyone around you is equally uninformed, the radio network provides no useful information. The psychological dependence on official emergency broadcasts creates a dangerous passivity during disasters. You wait for authorities to tell you what to do. You conserve your radio battery, hoping for updates. You remain in place, listening to static instead of taking independent action. This behavior pattern has been documented in disaster after disaster. People who survived Hurricane Katrina later reported that the absence of official information created paralysis. They did not know if rescue was coming. They did not know if conditions would improve. They waited for broadcasts that never came, while conditions deteriorated around them. The emergency radio that was supposed to provide life-saving information instead contributed to deadly indecision. The solution set for communication during infrastructure collapse is uncomfortable because it requires significant investment, training, and planning. Amateur radio licensing requires passing an examination covering electrical theory, regulations, and operating procedures. The examination is not difficult, but it requires study. The equipment investment starts around $300 for a basic setup and can easily reach several thousand for a capable station. Proper antennas require space and installation. Operating proficiency requires practice. This is beyond what most people are willing to invest for an uncertain emergency future, so they buy a cheap emergency radio instead and hope they will never need it. The community resilience model offers a more realistic approach for people unwilling to become amateur radio operators. A neighborhood with 10 families should have at least 2 people trained and equipped for emergency communications. These designated communicators maintain equipment, practice operations, and establish contact networks with nearby communities. During a disaster, these individuals become information nodes. They gather intelligence from radio contacts and relay it to their community. Everyone else can rely on short-range radios to maintain local coordination. This model distributes the burden of technical preparedness while ensuring someone has actual capability. The failure of emergency radios during real disasters reflects a broader pattern of disaster preparedness theater. We buy equipment that makes us feel prepared without actually improving our survival odds. We check boxes on preparedness lists without understanding the underlying systems. We trust that technology will save us without recognizing that technology depends on infrastructure. The emergency radio fails because the entire model of centralized emergency broadcasting collapses under the exact conditions it was designed to address. This is not a failure of engineering. This is a failure of systemic thinking. The electromagnetic spectrum represents a commons that almost no one understands how to access. Frequencies carry information through the air all around you right now. Weather forecasts, news broadcasts, government communications, amateur radio conversations, aviation traffic, maritime safety information. You are surrounded by information you cannot hear because you lack the right receiver. During a disaster, this information asymmetry can be fatal. The person with a working radio receiver tuned to the right frequency has actionable intelligence. The person with a dead emergency radio in their backpack has nothing. The difference between these scenarios is not luck, it is preparation and understanding. Your emergency radio represents a calculated bet that disaster will be temporary, localized, and managed by functioning authorities. This bet is often correct. Most emergencies last hours or days. Help arrives. Power is restored. The system recovers. But the disasters that kill people and destroy communities are the ones that exceed these assumptions. These are the disasters where the towers go dark and stay dark, where the backup generators run out of fuel, where the authorities are overwhelmed and cannot broadcast. These are the disasters your emergency radio was never designed to handle. And these are exactly the disasters where reliable information becomes most critical. The question is not whether your emergency radio will work. The question is whether the infrastructure it depends on will be functioning when you need it most. If you are prepared to accept that it probably will not be, then you can begin planning realistically. You can invest in systems that do not depend on towers. You can learn skills that do not require batteries. You can build community networks that function when official channels fail. Or you can put that brightly colored emergency radio back on the shelf and hope the next disaster is not the kind that proves just how useless it really is.